Hello, everyone. Okay, you guys, I have been talking to you about the awesomeness of Roya here, and I cannot wait to bring her on. And first, I just want to welcome you to the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm so excited. All the things we're going to talk about are my favorite things to talk about.
Oh, me too. Me too. I'm so excited as well. And we were talking and chatting beforehand, and we are definitely both cut from the same cloth. And this is going to be a fun conversation today, but also a very impactful conversation. So warm up your cheeks for some laughs, and also warm up your mind for some great info that you are going to be getting today, you guys. So I know I already told you all about who she is and what she has been able to do and contribute to this wonderful world of families. But I want to know from you kind of your story, right? Because so many of us have this weird, convoluted path that gets us to where we are and how we are contributing to the world. And I find them so fascinating because I know mine involves humpback whales. And you're like, how does humpback whales involve, So it's just all crazy. And I want to know, tell us a bit about your convoluted and fantastic story to get where you are today.
Oh, I love that. I was actually thinking mine involves kangaroo rats, but that's a whole other story. So my parents pulled me out of public school after fourth grade. So I never went back to public school after that. And I was furious. I was about to be a fifth grader. I was going to get a locker the next year. I was so excited. And my parents, that's a podcast all by itself, but basically they were seeing our love of learning and our curiosity getting made fun of by other classmates and just kind of getting stomped out. This is where the kangaroo rat comes in. I wanted to be a marine biologist. They made me study that little dinky desert animal, and I was furious, and that's the whole thing. So they pulled us out of school, my sisters and I, and then I started taking community college classes a few years later and was able to dive into ceramics and theater. I was in a Shakespeare group. I basically lived at the ceramic studio. I got to take English classes, and then a teacher actually read what I wrote and talked to me about it. It was so exciting. And basically, they just gave us all this incredible time to pursue what we were interested in. And so my life consisted of diving full body into to whatever I was interested in for like a month at a time, except for the things that were like 10 years at a time. But I was into this and I was into that and I was into this. And I couldn't have done it if I was busy. And I, at some point, wanted to get a degree and couldn't figure out what on earth that was going to be because I couldn't commit to any one particular, topic or interest. And it was actually my mom who said, there is this degree called Recreation and Leisure Studies. And I basically pursued it as the route to be able to keep all my options open and to keep getting to dive from thing to thing to thing. So I got a degree in Rec and Leisure. I was homeschooled. We were actually unschooled, which is a whole, again, another podcast. But basically, my entire life was about the important adults helping support me with what my passions were. And so I thought I was doing all this to get to an art therapy camp at some point. And I found myself in private practice, loving it. And then I kept getting drawn to the people who weren't quite fitting the mold of school. And maybe they had a diagnosis that didn't really help them sit still in a classroom. I had the rec and leisure background with a certificate in outdoor recreation. So all of these things, really, if I turn around and look backwards, right, the path makes sense. The things that I did where I am now, it makes total sense. Could not have predicted I'd be a therapist in a private practice. Not what I thought I was going to be. But everything just comes down to the importance and power of play and parents supporting their kids on that and how it impacts us on every single level, relationship, mental health, all the things. So that's my super fast story.
Oh, I love it. And I could not agree more about play and what it does. My husband and I are self-professed kids, we're just 40 something year old kids, and I hope I'm like that until I'm 120, because that's the age that my husband and I say we're going to live to, and we're sticking to it. So, but my goal, so I worked still doing discipline studies with families, but I worked in the wellness field for a long time. And my goal was always to help families be able to play with their grandkids and their great grandkids if possible. And that was always the vision I had in my head. It was always these grandparents and great grandparents playing, running around on a beach with their grandkids or great grandkids. And I find it interesting that lightness, that play, that fun, that laughter. I mean, big belly laughs are like a requirement in our house every day. When we get through a day without a big belly laugh, like something's going on, you know?
Yeah.
And just playing and being goofy and dance parties and voices, you know, all the crazy. But there was definitely a point in my life that I shied away from that because I didn't grow up necessarily with that as a basic nature in my family. And it took me a long time to give myself permission to do that for myself and for my kids. And I too, when I put my kids into homeschooling, my oldest was going into 5th grade, and I loved, you know, I think you were mentioning that your creativity was kind of being diluted and pushed down a bit, which is why they took you out. And I could definitely see that with my kids, which was one of our reasons too. So I just wanted to resonate with you on that. High five, you know, through the screen for that. But so with all that being said, you wrote that as a grown homeschooler, you conducted the largest study related to mental health and homeschooling in the United States. And I'm really interested about this. And may I preface this with saying that even though I do homeschool, I don't think that homeschool is the be all end all and everyone should or frankly can do it, but it is an option for some people. But even if you don't homeschool, play is at the top of the list, right? So I want you to tell me about this study. Like, what did it involve? What did it look like? What did you get from it? And then how did you use that information to, you know, extrapolate information and do what you do now?
So it was part of my master's thesis, and you had the choice in my department if you wanted to take a set of comprehensive exams or if you wanted to do a thesis. And in our whole cohort, I think 4 of us decided to do the year-long thesis. So we got tight. So I knew I wanted to study homeschoolers on some level because there really aren't that many studies. And so when people come to me and they say things like, yes, but have you seen all the damage that video games can do, or all the, you know, when I let my kids watch too much screens, all this. One of the big issues is that those studies are being done on kids whose entire time is being controlled one way or another. They don't have a lot of free time. And so those studies don't really apply to homeschoolers who, yes, if you only have a half an hour a day that's yours and you're spending it playing a game, that will impact you differently than if you have your entire day where you have agency and control and you choose to spend 4 of those hours playing Minecraft, right? It's going to impact you differently. So I knew I wanted to do some studies. Because I was in therapy school, I chose to study homeschoolers' attitudes towards seeking therapy, because one of the barriers that I see over and over again for homeschooled families is there's other stuff happening. Like, just because you're a homeschooling family doesn't mean there aren't other family dynamics. There's not anxiety or depression, or you have the need to reparent, or maybe some actual trauma coming from your school experience, and that's why you're homeschooling. And so many of the families that I've now worked with told me that they couldn't seek therapy because the therapist didn't understand homeschooling. And so they'd come to them and say, like, look, here's this complex list of issues that I have. And the therapist would say, well, put your kids in school, that'll solve it. And so I was assuming that homeschoolers would have a lower tendency to seek out mental health resources, even though homeschooling demographics otherwise are in the category of people who are higher in seeking out mental health resources, economically and educational wise and stuff like that. So, but then since I was going to do a measurement anyway, I was like, well, might as well do 5. And so I didn't only study their attitude towards seeking mental health, but I also studied happiness. And I really wish I could remember the names of all the measurement tools I used, but I looked at happiness. I looked at state and trait anxiety. I looked at homeschooling myths and the demographics so that I could talk about that as well. I also looked at value distribution, and I compared homeschoolers, I compared unschoolers, and I compared the general population of these particular measurement tools. Um, and so it was fascinating. I don't know, something like 40 different hypotheses that I went through. It was a very
Wow.
intensive. I have a book. I have a book, but I um, my biggest takeaway was that, oh, and I was looking at specifically grown homeschoolers and um, so people over the age of 18 who had been homeschooled or unschooled, and I was looking at parents who were doing the homeschooling. And so I also separated those numbers out to look at. And I think I got somebody from every state except two, I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly. I got thousands of participants. It was wonderful. Um, so in any case, my main takeaway is that homeschoolers are every bit as happy as the general population. There is no shocking mental health disparity in terms of anxiety or depression. We are not crazier than that of the general population, the mainstream. And adults who homeschool are statistically significantly happier.
Hmm.
And we also rank our values differently. And the one that I remember standing out the most is that curiosity values very, very highly in homeschooling, in the homeschooling population in that sample. Um, and I think we talk about play as being so important, but I think that if I look at play as the solution for all the things that need solutions in our world, the reason why play is so important and playfulness is because it sets a foundation for things like curiosity and creativity, divergent thinking, teamwork, problem solving, being able to look at one thing from a lot of different angles. It's the place where those characteristics are celebrated and nurtured and give us the place to do that. And so I think play by itself is important, and it's lighthearted, like you said, and it's fun and spontaneous. But I don't think we should ignore the fact that it has incredibly hard hitting, heavy, impactful results, like all of those characteristics. And I think that's why we measured happier.
Yeah. When you're saying that, like diversity comes into mind too, because when you're playing, you're usually talking about all sorts of fantastical created creatures. When my kids were little, I remember we used to, and it probably comes because I overwatched Bedknobs and Broomsticks when I was a kid. But
Yeah.
so we would all get on a bed and we would go travel to a magical place called Aurelia. And along the way there was water, and there would be like wolf sharks that would walk out and greet us, and there would be all of these things, and we were a part, as humans, we were the only humans there, right? And there was all of this diversity of creatures. And I think that's one of the lasting effects that can happen with play too. And so a couple of things I'm curious about real quick for our listeners. Can you quickly, because it's come up just a couple of times, define unschooling versus homeschooling?
Sure. There's pages and pages and pages of people talking about the difference, but for
Yes.
me, homeschooling, the big umbrella, and there's a lot of different ways to homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
And so for some people that might look like mimicking school at home with curriculum. You sit at a table for a certain amount of time a day, parent acts as teacher. That's one end of the spectrum. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum is unschooling, where parents are absolutely engaged. They're watching their kids, they're paying attention, but they're letting their kids' interests and their kids' passions lead the charge. And so, but it's not just like, oh, you're interested in the ocean, let's now do a unit study about whales. It's more philosophical than that, in terms of like not talking about subjects, not testing, not dividing things kind of arbitrarily based on like, oh, is this math or social studies or history, but just that like we learn from life, and we learn as things come up. We learn what we need to learn when it comes up, and the parent's job is to pay really good attention to support them in those things and kind of strew stuff in their path, and help provide resources, and just really like it's to me hyper engaged with the kid at the helm in that way. So
Yeah.
again, that's very brief. There's again pages and pages of people talking about the philosophical differences of that. Yeah.
And So I love teaching. And so I operate at that one end of the spectrum. I literally, for 2.5 hours a day, stand in front of a whiteboard and we teach. And I have a degree in biology, psychology. And so I love history. So I love, teaching history and learning about geography because quite frankly, my husband and I are public school kids through and through. I could not, if you would have asked me where Minnesota was probably 8 years ago, I would have been somewhere in the middle. I don't know, and so, but teaching my kids, I've been able to learn so much and we have so much fun doing it. But that is how we do things. And I really appreciate that flexibility with homeschooling. I know a friend of mine that taught an entire year, every subject, from science to math and all of that. But what they learned about all year was skateboarding. And everything was just learned through skateboarding, the physics of skateboarding, right? And like you're saying, it wasn't like right now we're learning about math. Right now we're learning about this, right? And so we do a hybrid in our school where in the mornings I do some stuff, and then in the afternoons they have their independent time to do like 2-3 hours of whatever they're doing. And so it has worked for us for 7 years, and it's been great. But anyway, I digress, and I think being able to play is one of the most important things that we can have in there during and outside of school. But the whole point is that school doesn't fit in the parameters of this time to this time, right? I was just talking with someone earlier today where they were talking about some of the biggest drivers of academic success. So we're talking about school success in later, so college, grad programs and things like that, actually had to do with the mindset of curiosity and education, and not to do with if they got an A in pre-calc in, 11th grade or not,
The grading can take so far away from the intrinsic drive to learn more.
Yes.
It's a direct detriment to it, in fact, often, which is why I think, I mean, I was a college teacher or professor until I went on maternity leave this year. But many of the students that I think actually learned the most were my B and C students who weren't maybe so worried about the grade and actually like dove in and retained the information, as opposed to the students who were driven by the grade. I think that's one of the damages that a school can do, is take away our innate curiosity and replace it with trying to achieve something extrinsically rewarding.
Absolutely. I was never an all A student, like when I was in school. And I was an AB student, but all my friends went off to, based on their GPAs and their SATs and all of that, they went off to these Ivy Leagues, right? And I was like, I went to Indiana University, which was a great school, and I had a great time. And I had, again, ABs when I graduated, which is not bad. Like, to be an AB student, I think I had maybe a 3.2 GPA, 3.2, 3.3. That is not bad by any means, but I felt bad. I felt like I was not good enough. I wasn't a good student, that academia wasn't my thing because I didn't get, the super high scores on the SATs and go to an Ivy League school. And so it really did affect, who I labeled myself as my identity in my wisdom. Even though academic wisdom is such a small part of wisdom, it made me identify myself as not being smart, which back then I was congruent with wisdom.
Yeah. And I say this during a medical pandemic, but this is also a pandemic, I think, that we experience with our school systems the way they are, is that, and why, again, playfulness and play is so important, because we don't learn things when we're not ready for them. We just don't. We either get resentful, angry, we internalize it, right, as I'm dumb or I'm stupid or I'm not good enough at it. We just don't learn it. And so if we get forced a standard menu of like, you're supposed to be able to do this at this week, right, and on this date you're supposed to be, you're this age, you're supposed to be able to do this thing, and we happen to be one of the people who we don't fit exactly in that little standard deviation curve, then it backfires. It does the opposite of educates us, right? It teaches us negative things about ourselves, or it causes us distress or anxiety. So then when we are ready, we don't pursue that because we already got the message that we aren't good at that thing, or we shouldn't even try. And so the wonderful thing about play, again, is that all of those things that we say are important for kids to be exposed to or to learn, and that we want for them, if we can do it either just in a playful way, but even that is sometimes forced from the adult coming from above, right? But if we pay attention to what kids are playing, that is the platform where we can learn those things. We can learn mathematical thinking and skills. We learn language. That is how we learn language. I have a 1-year-old. You know how she's learning how to talk? Because we're playing silly games. It's the neural pathways for linguistic development happen through play.
Mm-hmm.
So do the neural pathways for hopefulness and resiliency and optimism and spatial reasoning and logic, and like they happen through play. It's not separate from learning. So this is my soapbox.
So I have a quick question for you. That's a total personal question of mine. So put on your therapist hat. I'd love to know the answer to this. So when I was younger, I loved to play with Barbies with my cousins, with my friends and everything. As an adult, I despise playing Barbies. I really do. And when my kids tried to, play them with me, I would be, I would like grin and bear it for a little while. And then I'm like, I think your sister just really wants to play this with you, because I almost felt allergic to playing with Barbies and doing all of this role play stuff, but I don't know if it was the content of the material or what. And the same goes for board games. I cannot stand some board games. Now I love to play games, and we do a lot of escape rooms in our family. They have them online that you can do at home now. Like they do a lot of these things, but some of these board games, I just cannot handle it. So you tell me what's going on with me.
Well, there is such a thing as burnout, number one.
Okay.
Also, games are really good. Like we don't have to just play Monopoly over and over again, because have you search tabletop game into Google, you will find incredible, amazing, just games are good and they're accessible to everybody now. And so it's okay to not want to play the same thing over and over and over again. I will say, when I have parents, you are not the only parent to come to me and be like, okay, I know that play is good and I hate it. Please tell me, please help me. We are different kinds of people. I have to admit, I am not great at the make-believe play. Like that's my, like, really, child, we're playing veterinarian again for how many hours? It's okay. So big thing is to think about, like, I don't want to pass that on to my kid, right? So I have to do the work. I have to pay attention to that. I have to minimize my groaning and moaning as much as possible.
Yes.
And if that's the kind of play they want to do, I don't have to be the only person. It's
Yeah.
hard during COVID times, but part of my job is not to just be everything for my kid, but to set them up for it. If I don't want to play that level of, say they're super into, I don't know, Pokemon, right? And that is not your jam, you can't stand it, whatever. There are Pokemon groups out there. It is your job to support them in that pursuit, but you don't have to be the person playing over and over forever and ever. You do have to be the person, though, to not speak badly about Pokemon and to not say their interest is dumb or it's a waste of time, right?
Absolutely.
But you don't have to put in 14 hours a day of
Okay. Well, thank you for making me feel better about that. And, so the same goes for Muppets. I was a Muppet kid. I'm a child of the 80s. And now I just cannot stand them. And my kids find it so funny because they think I'm afraid of them. I'm like, I am not afraid of the Muppets. I'm just Muppeted out. And it happened, about 20 years ago. And I just can't take it anymore. Like I did Muppets Take Manhattan, Muppets do this, Muppets do that. I'm like, I can't take the Muppets anymore. But love Jim Henson, love all the stuff, that he created and gave me entertainment in my childhood. But man, I just cannot.
Yeah, that's right. There's lots. There's so many.
Yeah. But they really get a kick out of it, because when it comes on, I'm like, oh gosh. And they're like, oh, look, mom's reacting to the Muppets. Oh my gosh. So, okay. I want to talk about your book, because I think that this incredible book that you put out there is such a treasure. So it's was your first book, Connect with Courage. And it was subtitled Practical Ways to Work Through Fear and Find Joy in the Places Your Kids Take You, which I find fascinating, because I tell you that my kids, my 4 kids, they have taken me to some places I never thought I would go emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically, and so and some of them have been fraught with fear, and it's not like you can return them or put them back in. You got to deal with it. You got to keep going. And so tell me more about this book and your central message with it.
So this book started because I was working with a client on these things that come up for my clients and I, because this is my focus, right? Over and over again. And I was putting together just kind of an exercise sheet, like just kind of what we were talking about right now. They're saying, my kid loves this thing. And I'm saying, you have to look at that thing they love, and you have to come up with 15 reasons why they might love it. Like, this is your job to do. And so I was putting together just a little worksheet for them, and, come up with 5 physical benefits, come up with 5 emotional benefits, come up with 5, social benefits. And I looked up like 80 pages later, and it was a workbook to start. And it was something that I was handing out to people in terms of just helping them with their connection with their kid. Because what I kept seeing over and over again was they'd say, we're having struggles in our household. Here, have my child as a client. Their child would come in and be like, guess what? I'm the leading expert on this TV show. Or guess what? I'm super into this game. And I'd be like, that is super rad. Tell me about it. And we had a great relationship. And then what I was seeing with their parents were saying, that's a dumb interest, or I'm going to take it away as punishment, or yeah, I know you kind of like that card game thing. And the kids would just wither. And every time the parent would do that, it was like they were slamming another door when it could have been a bridge. And so over and over again, I was just seeing this opportunity for connection, for a better relationship, just kind of blocked off. And sometimes in really big, dramatic, painful ways, but more often in like really just small, like one little brick at a time, but those bricks add up to a really big wall over time. And when you don't have that kind of relationship, that open door bridge with your parents, then later on, when it's a big deal, when it's a safety issue, or when it's I need you to come pick me up at this party because I don't feel safe kind of a thing, those were the relationships that then the kids were less safe or less successful. And I was seeing it start so young at, come play this game with me, or let me tell you this cool thing, right? And so that was my goal, was to help parents with those moments. And so as I started paying a little bit more clinical attention to it, I started to hear the same reasons why parents were struggling with it, even the parents who really wanted to, even the parents who saw the benefit. And I started seeing them in 2 categories. There were the logistical barriers, like, okay, cool, I want to, but I've got 5 kids, or this is the house we have. They can't turn the dining room into their own personal art studio, or we just don't have the money for it. So I was seeing the logistical pieces. And then I was also seeing the emotional barriers. I'm a pacifist and all my kid wants to do is shoot Nerf guns, or I, they're really into this video game and it's super adult and violent and I can't stand it. So the things that would really trigger people's fear.
Yeah.
So this book is basically divided into those barriers, the logistical and the emotional ones. And then it's got some very practical, helpful solutions, but it also has those original exercises in it to help the parents do their own work, to figure out, why does that thing bother me? What am I afraid of? How could I view this differently? So that they have better relationships with their kids, and not just like tolerable relationships with the thing, but actually find that joy, be delighted in, I'm going to use your Muppets as an example here, be delighted in puppetry, be delighted in, and I've watched some parents go from being truly phobic of something to, I'm thinking of one in particular where it was horseback riding, and they wouldn't even go near to getting on horses and riding and going horse camping and like amazing times with their kid because they did that work. So that's the book.
So I find that interesting. And this is the reason I get a lot of people ask me, why are you not a parenting coach, but you say you're a family, life and leadership coach? Because it is the whole family that needs to come together. And a lot of times it is not necessarily the work that the kid needs to do, although there's always that too, but a family is a team. And a lot of times it's the work that the parent needs to do. And I have had more self-growth as a parent than I have in any other area. And not just in the way of I've had self-growth because I've had to manage a lot. There is that piece too, right? As a parent, I think parents are the greatest, business owners and the greatest strategists, because we can juggle 90 million things at the same time. But further than that, it's that reflection of, hold on, this is where I want I want to build my child to. This is what I want them to take out of their childhood. What do I need to do in myself in order to be the person that can teach them that thing? Right. And there's a lot of work that can happen with that sometimes based on our own childhoods and what we have, our luggage, air quotes, that we are bringing into parenting. And what are we bringing into parenting that we actually kind of don't want to bring in? And we have to be able to recognize that and do something about it. And so, yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. So go get the book. All the listeners, go get the book. So good. Okay. And lastly, before we leave, Roya and I, we both speak TV. And by that, we can shoot out these, I just related to that. Again, 80s kid, I grew up with a lot of TV. I love TV and movies. And especially during the pandemic, so many people have been watching a lot of TV. And as parents, we're trying to build that truth and trust with our kids all the time, right? Which goes back to everything that we've said in this episode so far. And we want to see that in our TV episodes too. And what I mean by that is I notice when my kids were little, and even now, my kids are 16, 14, 14, 12 now. And even now, if we're watching a show or they're watching a show where there is not a great relationship between the parents and the kid, then they start mimicking that, right? Because kids are active learners. They don't just learn something either passively or actively, but they don't just learn it and leave it, right? Or learn it and decide. They're learning it and they're trying it out all at the same time. And so I notice that if we're watching a show like that, then there's some of these like false aggressions or false spaces that are coming between us. And I'm like, well, where is this coming from? Right? Where are you learning this from? What are you trying to get from this? Right. And so it's just really interesting, but I would love to know, with people in this, pandemic era that we have now fallen into, that some people say, oh, I've watched Netflix, right? I haven't just watched something on Netflix. I've like watched Netflix, or I've watched Disney Plus. I've watched, I don't know, Apple TV, which seems crazy, but when you're watching TV for 2.5 years or 2 years, whatever, people could do that. And so I'm curious, what are some of your favorite shows that you've watched as a family that has not only been entertaining, but also grown, maybe the play or maybe the curiosity, maybe the relationship? So I'm curious.
Okay, I'm writing things down really quickly so I can remember. This is cracking me up because right now downstairs on our kitchen door, we started talking. We've been watching Encanto 5 times a day.
Yes.
And my kids are young, and this might shock some people, but they're about to be 8 and about to be 5, and then I have an about to be 1-year-old, and they've discovered The Simpsons, and it's hysterical. I'm like, I haven't watched this since I was 25, but all right, here we go. And so right now there's a Venn diagram of Encanto and The Simpsons on our wall downstairs, because they started talking about like, oh, and they're both families, and oh, they're cartoons, and there are some people who are kind of mean in both of them, and we just started comparing them, so we threw it up on the wall.
I love that.
It's funny. So you have kids that they're try it honors, it sounds like, right? So if they see something and they kind of want to experiment with that, they do it.
Some of them, yeah.
I have one who's very much like that, and one who is the out loud processor. And so the way I handle TV is going to be different with my different kids, just because they try things on really differently. But I have to say, okay, so She-Ra, the new She-Ra, is one of our favorite TV shows as a family. It's amazing. It's everything that is right and good in the world. It's phenomenal. We love it. It's just fantastic.
I didn't even know there was a new She-Ra.
Oh my gosh, it's on Netflix. There's 4 or 5 seasons. I can't remember. It's so good on every level. Oh my goodness. And I can't remember exactly who's what, but the people who did the Lumberjanes comics, which are also phenomenal, it's the same writer, the same artist, there's some connection there. So if you like that, there's a rabbit hole of goodness that I can take you down. It's not a TV show, it's a movie, but Encanto is the best thing to happen to the mental health world since Inside Out. Hilda, if you've never watched the show Hilda, we love Hilda. It's another animated, I think it's on Netflix. And she's just the quirkiest little adventurer. And it's another show where my kids are very into relationships. So all of these shows, we talk a lot about the friendships and the relationships and the parent-child relationships and all of that. Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I think if you asked my 7-year-old, what is your favorite show? He would say Brooklyn Nine-Nine, quite possibly. He loves it. We have a lot of conversations about things in the world. And Survivor. We have, as a family, watching all 40 gajillion seasons of Survivor again together. And
I think that's an accurate assessment.
I think it is. It's 40 gajillion. And that was one I didn't really watch when it was like coming out 40 gajillion seasons ago, but now as a family we're watching and sometimes rewatching. And again, it's about the challenges, but it's the relationships too. And then that stemmed into watching Top Chef, because my 7-year-old is super into cooking and he likes to geography and around the world kind of stuff. So he just started getting to the point where real humans on TV are holding his attention, and it doesn't have to be cartoon, which is a delight. Trying to think of what's they really like, it's a lot of story arc shows. They like things like Elena of Avalor or Sophia, like the kind of long seasons of the same kingdom. Lion Guard. What else are we going back and forth? Oh, Odd Squad is wonderful. We'll watch Odd Squad. We watch a lot of TV.
Yeah. So same kind of reason with Survivor. Our family really likes Amazing Race, and so watching that one is a lot of fun. And we don't know personally, but a family that we watch closely, the Holderness family, is on The Amazing Race right now, and so we love watching them. And I just love their family. So we get to watch them, and we feel like we're watching someone we know, even though they're like, who? To us.
One of my students was on Survivor, and so that was really fun. I spent a week on a different island with her because I helped run a class on one of the Channel Islands, and she was there. And so getting to watch her, I'm like, hey, look, we taught her everything she knows about island survival.
Love it. That's so funny. And I do love the one that we just watched, which I really, really love. We all did, was School of Chocolate. So it's on Netflix. And what I loved about it is it really was a teaching show, and they are working and, somewhat competing against one another, but there was never an elimination. They all stayed. And by the end, there was 2 main people that it was between, but everyone else was on their teams. And so it really was this beautiful story arc, kind of what you're saying, of people that were working kind of against one another, and then they started working for one another, and it became this team atmosphere. And the guy that ran it was truly a teacher, and he came around and helped everybody. It wasn't like what are you doing? Okay, great, I'll leave you alone for the next 16 hours. And what they created was beautiful. So anyway, out of all those shows, I really recommend School of Chocolate. It was very cool.
I've been watching Project Runway a lot forever. And we've been having a lot of conversations lately about the feelings of, getting kicked off, but they're also having to collaborate, and they're on a team, but they're not on a team. And it's mimicking, my son is doing this basketball thing right now, and he had a moment of confusion because they said partner up, but then it was the defense and the offense, and he's like, but we're not partners, but we're partnered up. And like, it was just this really, I don't know, it was a cool couple of moments there. But I'm gonna look at the School of Chocolate.
School of Chocolate.
Personally, I am a fan of every single Mike Schur, The Good Place, The Office, Parks and Rec might be the best show ever. All of that level of show. So my kids watch kind of alongside me for lots of it, but
yeah.
Yeah.
We watched The Good Place. That was a good one. We all watched that as family, but my kids are older, so they get a lot more than the little ones. But oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for being here. We covered so much in this talk, but I think, as we're still laughing at the end, but covering, how to connect, how to have that trust and truth with your kids so you can get them to a level that when it is their turn, it is time to pass over the baton of take over your own life now, right? They have the skills to be able to do that. And that's what we're all about. And I know that's what you're all about too. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Really, I just like I said, this is my soapbox. I can talk about it forever. And I also just wanted to mention that in addition to the book, which can sometimes feel intimidating for people, even though you really can just open it at any random place, I think, and get something. I'm also doing this new thing where I'm doing 30-minute Zoom calls once a month. So if people go to my website, they can see the next one is for parents of teens to help their teens with their big feelings. But I'm rotating through age groups and topics. We did a screen time one, a parenting reset, and they are all donations based. So that I just want to be able to offer that for people who can't come have one-on-one sessions or access me that way. So.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will put your website down into the show notes for this too. Absolutely. Well, okay, listeners, we have given you a lot to listen to today, a lot to process, but also some things that you can take literally and start using right away, including some great shows to watch with your family. So we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day today. And remember, we're always building. And I hope that you are the architect of your own home as we are building the beginning of someone else's life with our kids. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.